Hello, it's Celeste, and today I'm going to be talking about effective instruction in history social science. So, to begin my agenda for this presentation, I will begin by discussing effective instruction in history and social science. Then I will move on to discussing instructional sequencing and its importance. Then I will go on to academic language, differentiated instruction / scaffolding. And then finally, I will be concluding this presentation by talking a bit about the EdTPA central focus and history social science. So the first area I will be discussing is on instruction in history social science. More specifically, in regards to effective instruction in history social science, so you want to make sure that you provide multiple entry points into every lesson. So for example, you can use analogies in history by making comparisons. So when you talk about, for example, after spring break in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be starting our unit on the Civil War in my 8th grade history and geography class, U.S. history. So for example, I can provide multiple entry points into that lesson on the Civil War by making an analogy or comparison that says daily life in the Civil War was like, and I can compare it to something that will help different types of students understand and be able to kind of get into the lesson and get engaged with the lesson. You also want to make sure you use a variety of group formats and configurations. On a little bit on that, so for example, I can have my students after posing a question to them regarding the Civil War, I can have them think about it to themselves and then do a quick little pair share with their C partner that they sit next to. And then I can also extend that, if I would like, into a think pair square share in which two partners get together with another set of two partners, and then it becomes kind of like a square of 4 students discussing and sharing ideas back and forth. You also want to make sure that you describe and demonstrate each strategy or technique. So for example, guided instructions, you want to make sure that there's some modeling or, as we know, the I do portion of the lesson plan in order to show students what is to be expected of them, and so that they can get more of an understanding of what to do in that specific lesson for the day. You also want to develop students' background knowledge using different techniques. So what I like to do is present students with a warm-up question in which students are able to draw on their background knowledge on the topic. But I also want to kind of give them something that's going to connect to their personal life and engage them, and also develop more of their funds of knowledge that are included in their background knowledge as well. You also want to initiate students into the thinking specific to history social science. So students must learn how to read, use, and understand disciplinary discourse. So for example, in history social science class, this means working and thinking like a historian. You also want to celebrate student success in and out of the classroom and use different types of instruction to teach skills and knowledge, as well as make and use connections to improve comprehension, increase engagement, and enhance memory. So you want to provide opportunities for students to use, practice, apply, and improve upon various skills, not just content, but skills as well. So next we have instructional sequencing. Instructional sequencing, it's kind of like this cycle of planning and then instructing and then assessing students. So to begin, you want to focus on desired outcomes when designing instructional sequences. So kind of this idea of backwards planning. And what that means is you want to make sure that you're thinking about how you're going to assess students before you actually instruct students. You also want to align your instruction and assessments with the appropriate standards. And Schmoker gives some helpful advice regarding standards. So he advises history social science teachers to create and lay out power standards by grading period and units to determine the approximate number of class periods to devote to each. And you also want to create 2 or more overarching questions for the unit using evidence from analysis of primary and secondary sources. So using essential questions is really key in instructional sequencing. So you also want to do that and include big ideas that help frame and guide instruction, as well as define objectives and criteria clearly before we begin teaching the lesson or unit. Moreover, you want to assess students before teaching to determine their current knowledge and skill levels and tap into their prior knowledge in some type of pre-assessment, as well as provide useful, specific, meaningful feedback throughout the learning cycle. And also assess and understanding and use the results to improve teaching. I believe that instructional sequencing is a continuous cycle of planning, instructing, and assessing that allows for room to make adjustments throughout the instructional sequence, thus improving student learning outcomes. Next, we have academic language. Specifically, academic conversations in history, social science can be kind of simplified and broken down into these 3 categories here. So to begin, historical thinking. This refers to inferring cause and effect, recognizing bias, and applying and transferring knowledge to new contexts. So for example, in regards to inferring cause and effect, students must be trained to recognize different ways that certain events have led to others, as well as for recognizing bias, they must be trained to recognize bias and be critical of information from books and media. Also, applying and transferring knowledge to new contexts, knowledge allows students to build more complex concepts over time and to develop thinking skills. So applied learning means that the student is able to match a concept or a skill to a life situation or problem, and this just makes things more engaging for students because these ideas and theories are useful in the real world and in one's own life. Cognitive flexibility includes history's habits of mind, and some of these habits of mind include noticing the interplay of change and continuity in history, and seeing that history's many lessons do not always apply to the present, and there are also 4 others for 6 in total. And classes can make posters and graphic organizers that emphasize these history habits of mind as well. Some activities for history social science classrooms that really emphasize academic language in academic conversations include history quotation conversations, in which students converse about a quotation or set of quotations in order to explain their meanings, as well as historical analysis table, a cause and effect diagram in which students are able to infer and evaluate, as well as fact-thought combinations that help students be critical, take a different perspective, and question accepted lines of thinking. Next, we'll be talking about differentiated instruction / scaffolding. I included a quote here that I feel really emphasizes the importance of differentiation from Jim Burke, which states, "Enter the classroom with the belief that all students can learn and can succeed if you provide them with the necessary emotional and cognitive support." Okay, so supporting all students. So you want to make sure that you identify and teach to students' strengths and use different methods, strategies, and configurations. So you want to make sure you support all students to ensure success. And also cluster learner needs to make instructional planning more efficient, as well as selecting instructional strategies that support responsive teaching. So Tomlinson and McTee really emphasize that virtually all students should consistently experience curricula that's rooted in the important ideas of a discipline, so in this case history, social science, that requires them to make meaning of information and think at high levels. So students need opportunities to learn the basics and opportunities to apply them in meaningful ways. You also want to make sure you uncover the content as opposed to just cover the content. And in a history social science class, for example, this can be done in an inquiry-based lesson or unit in which students are presented with an inquiry question, and they're to do research and gather information and analyze various sources to kind of come to a conclusion on that question and try to find an answer to that question or build an argument based on that question. There are also guiding principles of effective grading and reporting, and you also want to make sure you differentiate the unit to ensure maximum student growth. So in my personal experience in my placement for student teaching, I have found that I have gained a lot more insight into differentiation. I feel like I've received a lot of help, thankfully, in this area from my guide teacher and also paraprofessionals that do work in my classroom with my special education cluster of students. I feel like I've learned a lot more about different types of students just from working with them and really connecting with them on different levels and making sure that I am continuously working to help them achieve the goals that the high expectations that I set for all of my students. So I personally feel like differentiation is something that is extremely important in all content areas. Lastly, I will be going over the EdTPA Central Focus for History Social Science. The EdTPA Central Focus for History Social Science should support students in learning and using facts, concepts, and inquiry, interpretation, or analysis skills to build arguments or conclusions about historical events, a topic or theme, or a social studies phenomenon. So I feel like Schmoker provides some very good examples from History Social Science that connect to the EdTPA Central Focus for History Social Science. So a couple of the ones that I've chosen directly relate to my placement currently in 8th grade U.S. History and Geography. So the first, it states, evaluate U.S. behavior during the westward movement, including the war with Mexico, Louisiana Purchase, and acquisition of Oregon. And this allows students to make arguments, inferences, draw conclusions from conflicting views and source documents that you can see really connects back to the various aspects of the central focus on concepts, inquiry, and analysis, and drawing conclusions and building arguments. The next one states, come up with the realistic post-Civil War reconstruction program based on your own ideas and synthesis of the plans you learned about in your textbook and other readings. He also talks about writing and close reading in history social science and how students should write at least one unit paper each grading period or each semester. And I feel like utilizing a versatile scaled back rubric and student checklist of criteria when doing this all really connect to the central focus for the EdTPA as well. And also primary sources and current events. So finally, making sure you teach students how to annotate and underline and form arguments from reading. So going back to the EdTPA Central Focus for History Social Science, we can see how students use facts, concepts, and build arguments about historical events, topic, theme, or phenomenon when reading these various primary sources. That is the end of my effective instruction in history social science video. Thank you for watching.